Okay, today we're going to talk about convergence again, or still. Really thought long and hard about how to title this thing today, and I'll talk about it a little bit at the beginning because I think that we live in a very confusing world. So let's pray. Lord, just pray that you will give us a spirit of confidence, not fear, that we'll be able to face the things that are going on in the world around us and to help make some sense of it, and to always be people that are that exhibit your truth and your love to those around us. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we talk each week about convergence of events. And, there's some weeks when I think, well, I'll certainly be able to get everything done before I walk up here. But this Sunday was about as hard as it ever was, just because there's a lot of mixed messages going on in the world. Let me do a couple things at the beginning. First, Department of Corrections. I had announced that I was speaking at a conference in Calgary the end of April, early May, and that part was true. The part I got wrong, it's 2021. So there is a conference in Calgary around that time. I think it's called Last Days Bible Conference or Last Day Prophecy Conference. You can look it up on the internet. I know they will have great speakers this year, as they do every year. So I'm in a year, and so that's good because that gets Canada to get its time to get its act together, get their pipelines finished, and get Trudeau out of office and that type of thing. On March 29th, I'm going to be doing first service here. I'm going to talk mainly about, I think, the Enneagram and spiritual formation as part of an indicator of the last days apostasy. You might remember a number of years ago I did a series on the 7 churches of Revelation. I was actually part of a series on Revelation. And I'll be honest with you, I got to Revelation 17, and I spent a lot of time studying all the stuff about Babylon and Mystery Babylon and all that stuff. And I did not think that I could clear up what I view as sort of a lot of opinions on what that passage means. And I didn't really want to add to the conclusion. When we talk about the church of Laodicea, though, it's interesting. There's these 7 churches in Revelation, and the belief of a lot of people, and I kind of lean this way myself, is that they represent sort of 7 general ages of the church since the founding of the church in the book of Acts, and that the predominant characteristic of the church in each of these eras will be, the characteristics of the church at Ephesus, the characteristics of the church at Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And when you get to Laodicea, it's very clear that you have a church that was, this church was really messed up. They didn't get any commendation from the Apostle Paul. They were confused. They had a mixture of everything. And I think it's hard to argue that this is not the age of the Laodicean church when you look at it in the broad term. I get phone calls. I talk to a lot of people. This happens, it doesn't matter what city it's in. People call me up and they're like, I've been to every church in my area, and it's all churches that are trying to look like a nightclub or try to look like the world. And the sermons are essentially TED Talks, 15 minutes, good advice, nothing very deep. And one of the characteristics of Laodicea is really wrapped up in its name. The book, Laodicea, Lao means peoples, and Dikidomai or Dikidzo means opinion. And so what you have essentially the church of people's opinion. And does that sound like the church in general today? When you try to talk to people about, for example, as I'll talk about spiritual formation and the Enneagram, that seems to be sweeping, the Enneagram part seems to be, and I'll explain what it is. It's essentially sort of a personality test, but it's sweeping over the church. And it's like every week I get information that this university or this college or this church or that denomination are adopting this. And it's really pushed by a guy named Richard Rohr, who has a thing called Center for Action and Contemplation out in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he's not Christian. And everybody cites to him, and he bought it off of some New Age guys, a guy who I can't remember his last name begins with N, and he is a self-described shaman. And so everybody in the church is running around like, well, I can do better than, I'm going to sanctify this. We're going to have Christian yoga. We're going to have Christian Enneagram. And it's absolute nonsense, but everybody's opinion that what they're doing is okay is running rampant. And the Lord has a very stark warning for that. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that thou wert cold or hot. So then because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Now, there's a lot of allusions in Revelation to the temple. And one of the things that you could not do in the temple area was spit. So essentially, so you just weren't allowed to do that. You had to do it outside the sacred temple precinct. So in Revelation 3:16, saying that the Laodicean church would essentially saying that it would be removed to a place outside of God's protection, outside of the sacred area that God had set aside. And that's a pretty stark warning. There's also other, and part of the what happened in Laodicea was Laodicea didn't have its own water source, so it brought in water source from Hierapolis, which was warm springs. It's a very beautiful area even to this day. And then Colossae, but by the time it got to Laodicea, it mixed. And it wasn't hot water like at the springs at Hierapolis, and it wasn't cold water like they had at Colossae. It was just, I spent a lot of my life growing up in Northeast Ohio, where when you were there, you never noticed it. But when you go back, you turn on the tap, and it smells like rotten eggs. There's a lot of sulfur in the water, and it's pretty disgusting if it's not treated. And this is sort of the picture that Jesus gives. There's also a passage that I was looking at a little bit this week in 2 Kings chapter 22, and I've talked a little bit about this in the past. And I'm not going to go read a lot about this, but there was in the days of Josiah and Ahab, Josiah wanted to go into battle, and he'd done a lot of good things. He had torn down the high places and that sort of thing. He went to, I may get my stories mixed up here just a second. I'm looking for my, well, I'll have to dig it out later. We'll talk about it later. I shouldn't have talked about it just because I wasn't prepared, but there was a prophet named Micaiah. And he went to Ahab. And Ahab says, what should we do about this battle? Should he go into this battle? The king of Judah. Micaiah says, sure, go ahead, you'll win. And Ahab goes, well, I know you're not being straight with me. And the king of Judah had asked Ahab, listen, do you have any prophets that could help me? And he says, yeah, I've got 400 here. And they always tell me good things. Because, yeah, but do you have any others? Well, I got this Micaiah guy, and he hates me. Because he always gives me bad news. And the long story short was that Micaiah came and told the king what he should do. He avoided it. He didn't do what was right, and the consequences were pretty bad. But it kind of gives you an indication there that there were 400 prophets who were always going to tell the king good news, what he wanted to hear. But there was only one that was really to stand up and say what was really going on. Now, this week, I'm going to talk about the coronavirus in just a minute. Let me give a couple things out of the way. So we have a Department of Corrections, already talked about that a little bit. We also have a Too Good to Check department. Now I'm told that this is a sign outside of Bethel Church in Reading that the healing rooms are canceled because of the coronavirus. Okay? As I said, that's too good to check. I'm sure somebody will fact check it for me and tell me whether it's right or not. But, and we'll talk probably a little bit about Bethel when things come up here in a few weeks when I talk about that specifically. Here's an interesting picture. It's a picture of a volcano in Indonesia. And this is what the person reports. This volcano in Indonesia has just spewed out more CO2 than every car driven in history. So, speaking of spewing CO2, Senator Charles Schumer was outside the Supreme Court. They're considering an abortion bill. And Charles Schumer had some things to say about Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh.
From Louisiana to Missouri to Texas, Republican legislatures are waging a war on women, all women. And they're taking away fundamental rights. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Now this was an editorial cartoon that somebody had made up about Senator Schumer, and he said I wasn't really making a threat. Now it sure sounded like a threat, and I don't really care if people have different opinions about Supreme Court opinions, but even Larry Tribe, who's a very liberal constitutional professor from Harvard University, said that this was way, way out of line. Even some of the people on MSNBC were saying it was way out of line, that what he did, especially in the charged political environment. This tweet came from Ilhan Omar on the same subject. Two accused sexual predators should not be deciding whether or not women have access to health care in this country. So I'm only showing this to show that the level of rhetoric is really ramping up. We're still, 8 months away from this election? We can only imagine what it's going to get like. And you saw a lot of this around the coronavirus this week. Now, MSNBC helped us out with some math issues, talking about the contributions of Mayor Bloomberg Michael Bloomberg to his campaign and how that could have helped other people. So here's Brian Williams and a reporter from the editorial board of the New York Times.
But you see it as a possibility if he wants to spend $1 billion beating this guy, he could do it.
Absolutely. Somebody tweeted recently that actually with the money he spent, he could have given every American $1 million.
I've got it. Let's put it up on the screen. When I read it tonight on social media, it kind of all became clear. Bloomberg spent $500 million on ads. U.S. population 327 million. Don't tell us if you're ahead of us on the math. He could have given each American $1 million and have had lunch money left over. It's an incredible way of putting it.
It's an incredible way of putting it. It's true. It's disturbing. It does suggest, what we're talking about here, which is there's too much money in politics.
Okay, so simple math, pre-Common Core math. you would actually take 500 million and divide it by 327 million, you would come up with $1.53, not $1 million per American. You would have to multiply that amount that he contributed by 1,000, so which is more money than he even had. And it took them a while. And the interesting thing is that, you know, look, when you speak publicly and everything, you're going to say things that aren't clear. You're going to make mistakes. I've done it. That's why we have the thing called the Department of Corrections here. But this thing went through, somebody had to make up the graphic, you know, copy the tweet and put it up. And they looked at it and they read it and they talked about it. And it got through a lot of different levels with nobody realizing that their math was way off. So they eventually, I think she's locked her Twitter account now, and I don't know if that's a self-imposed exile or whatever. Well, the coronavirus has led to a lot of interesting comments. This one was somebody put up, toilet paper, $3,999, free 1 carat diamond ring with purchase. And so I was thinking about this as I left the office the other day, all the different things, you know, we have the hand sanitizer thing sitting on every desk now, there's a hand sanitizer. And I'm like, but does anybody sanitize the hand sanitizer container? Shouldn't we be doing that? And how do you do that? And so I was thinking, like, well, you know, how many ways am I going to possibly get infected with this when I leave the office and go to my car? So I have to push the door open. Whichever way I leave the office, there's, you know, several exits. If I'm coming back in, I have to pull or I have to enter a keypad. And then I get to the elevator in the supreme wisdom of our landlord at the Huntington Center in downtown Columbus. They used to come up and you push an up button or a down button, right? Not anymore. They took away the button, and I thought, well, if there was the button, I could take a, you know, like a pencil out of the office supply and then throw the pencil away or something, you know, after I've and so, but now it's a touchpad. You have to touch it with your hand. And so there's one on each side and they have like 3 banks of elevators in the building. And so there's like 6 touchpads down there in the lobby, and then every floor has a couple, and you have to touch them. And when you get on the elevator now, there's no buttons on the inside of the elevator because you do the touchpad, and then it tells you which car to get on. And if you're sitting there like everybody else, you know, you hit the pad, and it's like, oh wait, which one? So now you have to touch the pad again because you forgot which one elevator she told you to get on. So then you go over and I have to push the revolving door to get to the parking garage. And then I go to the parking garage, and it's the same landlord, but it's, you know, elevator classic, I call it now, that you punch a button. So I could touch that button. Then I get on the elevator and I have to touch another button. And then I go down and I have to push open the door. So there's about 12 ways that I'm going to die or catch this thing if it ever breaks out in Columbus. I'm doomed. It's almost impossible. You know, it's either that, work at home, wear gloves, or I don't know, retire and play golf maybe. But so this thing has spread. A lot of really great graphics. The Wall Street Journal did a very good series this week on the spread of the coronavirus. It sort of shows how it's spread from Wuhan around the world. It's pretty much everywhere now. One article that they had in the Wall Street Journal the other day was a doctor's life, excuse me, all morning. A doctor's life on virus front lines. And this is I will say, I consider myself a moderately intelligent person, able to read a lot of different things. And what I've noticed this week is that it's a Laodicean world. Everybody has an opinion. And very often, people hold opinions that are highly inconsistent. I was listening to a radio show, and the person was quite critical of governments around the world, China and the CDC, and virtually everyone about they didn't do the right thing. They should have shut this thing down early on. And so we can have that opinion. A minute later, he was talking about what they're doing in Kirkland, Washington, where they're quarantining people in nursing homes. And he was saying, look what they're doing. It's horrible. They're violating our civil liberties. Now, wait a minute. So which one is it? You want government to do something, but then when government does anything, you complain that it's a plot to take away our civil liberties or to kill us all or what. It's sort of like I played the video of the Bill Gates funded the Gates Foundation and World Economic Forum funded that coronavirus war game back in October. And so a lot of people, their theory is, they were just planning on how they were going to kill us. But then on the other hand, do we not want public health people engaging in exercises like this to plan? And so what you see is you see everybody has an opinion, and there's this massive cognitive dissonance. So I can tell you for certain is I don't know how bad this thing is going to be. I will say when you read articles, and everybody says there's the other side, this is the end of the world, this is the pestilence of Revelation, and other people say, it's just the flu, man. It's all overhyped, nothing to worry about. This article, very good journalistic investigation here, 22 doctors in Wuhan died. Now, I'm just telling you, that doesn't sound like the flu to me. Now, it is true that it's probably hitting older people more, and particularly older males, particularly people with pre-existing conditions. But part of the problem is there's not enough testing kits. And I don't know that it's a fair criticism to say, well, they should have had more testing kits, but you don't have a testing kit until you know exactly what the virus is that's out there running around. And it takes time to manufacture these things. And if all the manufacturing facilities where these might be made are shut down, that makes it a little bit more difficult. And I've heard some of the most disgusting things. AIPAC, a couple people that went to the American Israel Political Action Committee conference were diagnosed with the coronavirus. And of course, all the people in Congress and I think Vice President Pence and other politicos were speaking at that conference. When those people returned to Israel, if they came from Israel, they were put in 14-day quarantine. And I heard one show, I'm not going to say the name, you can pretty much guess who it is, saying, the Zionists, see, I told you, the Zionists are going to kill us. This is the judgment of God for being a Zionist. And that is vile and disgusting. And it is not indicative of somebody that's, well, you can make your own judgment. I don't like to make judgments about people's salvation, but this, you ought to read this. If you can get a hold of this article in the Wall Street Journal about the doctor working multiple hours. They're staying in these Tyvek suits for 10 or 12 hours, not drinking, not going to the bathroom. And, so maybe they're making their immune system, they're killing their immune system by doing the extra work. But I'm just saying, as I read these stories about things that are happening, and I'll play you a clip of a doctor here. So it leads me to believe that it's not just the flu. How far it will spread and how severe it will be is nobody knows at this time. I have seen projections of, millions dead around the world, 1 million dead, 2 million dead in the United States. I do know in Italy, they've shut down the Lombardy region up around Milan and Venice. They have said that they believe in the very short term they will have 3,000 people in need of intensive care beds in a hospital, and they don't have that. I've seen pictures of people dropped off at a hospital, a video of a guy dropped off at the hospital in Tehran, and they let him lay on the street because they don't have a bed in the hospital for him. And of course, some of the places this hits, there's governments that are not very open. So it is a big problem. You can see the growth, the little bar graphs here in the gold color of people diagnosed, people dying, the problems. But the biggest problem seems to be, for sure, one thing we can measure right now is that there is a big economic impact from all of this. For example, this is a chart in the Wall Street Journal showing that when they get in the darker brown the color is, that means that the markets are dropping. The Treasury bonds are at an all-time record low. Mortgage rates, I think, are also at an all-time record low. And things are just not doing well. Now, there's some places that seem to be doing okay, like Hong Kong and Macau and Taiwan. But what they did was when they started seeing this happening, they shut everything down. Now, I think in Taiwan, they're going to keep the schools closed until May. And so when they do that, then everybody says, well, they're just stoking fear. They're just trying to make people nervous. They're trying to take control of everything. And nefarious people will always try to take opportunities with that. But if they didn't do anything and something happened, of course, what would the same people be saying? Well, you should have done something. And so what I did an interview on Stand for the Truth this week, and I said, I don't know. All I know is that I'm seeing some things here that are not the normal outbreak. Bank stocks are down. El Al laid off 1,000 people. Southwest said they're going to be down several $100 million in revenue this quarter. Cruise lines will be going bankrupt pretty quickly. Their stocks have been cut in half. And, so people say, well, why are they keeping them on the cruise ship? And there's maybe they shouldn't be, but where did they transfer them? So I saw another radio program, or listened to another program, where they set up like mobile trailers in a neighborhood in Seattle. And everybody says, well, why did they do that there? Well, because that's where the people, why didn't they do that out in the woods? Well, because the people are here. And so everybody has, you understand what I'm trying to say is everybody has an opinion. And I don't think I've ever seen an issue that sort of encapsulates confusion more than this particular issue. What happens now when something really bad happens? Are people just not going to pay attention and it spreads even quicker? And we know, if we're students of Bible prophecy, we know that this pestilence is coming. It will come on the world. So at a minimum, this is sort of a snapshot. But like Ahab, he liked the 400 prophets because they always told him good news. You're not going to have a problem, king. He didn't like the prophet that told him the truth. They didn't treat Jeremiah very well, if you might remember, even though Jeremiah was right. So this is a huge problem. In the Times of London on Friday, there was an editorial. Now I'm going to read part of the editorial, but I actually, if you get past the first couple of paragraphs, I actually agree with some of the things that the guy said. It's a financial analyst. But I want you to see what he says at the beginning, because I think there are people that would agree 100% with what he says. He says this: virus can trigger a new industrial revolution. Starts off, don't take this the wrong way, but if you are a young, hardline environmentalist looking for the ultimate weapon against climate change, you could hardly design anything better than the coronavirus. Unlike most other such diseases, it kills mostly the old who, let's face it, are more likely to be climate skeptics. It spares the young. Unlike most other such diseases, it kills mostly the old. It spares the young. Most of all, it stymies the forces that have been generating greenhouse gases for decades. Deadly enough to terrify, containable enough that aggressive quarantine measures can prevent it from spreading. The rational response for any country determined to prevent loss of life is to follow China's lead and lock down their economy to stem its spread. And then he goes on and he says, of course, it's quite possible life returns to normal after coronavirus. But one consequence of this disease could be that it forces us to take a long, hard look at the way we run the world and change it. Now, in some respects, he's correct. He goes, most downturns are Darwinian moments for capitalism. The old go out, lumbering companies that failed to move with the times, and in come their disruptive rivals in a blaze of creative destruction. Hardship focuses the mind, and companies find more efficient ways of running their businesses. The economy that emerges should be more productive than its predecessor, yet in this crisis, the opposite may be happening. The more efficient, which is to say the cheapest way companies have found of manufacturing products, is to use supply chains that straddle the globe in search of cheap labor. If something could be made for less on the other side of the world, so be it. Yet coronavirus, which threatens to constrain the free movement of people and goods, will deny companies this cheapest avenue. Companies will have to think long and hard about whether intercontinental supply chains make sense. Already some companies are shifting production back home and opting for home-built components. On the one hand, that spells enormous disruption and could make all of our lives more expensive, yet there is also a silver lining, which one need only to appeal to Extinction Rebellion. What if this new nudge we need to embrace, what if this is the nudge we need to embrace a new model of what? Globalization. And this is the problem. It is, and of course, this is his concluding then, it's possible life returns to normal after coronavirus, but one consequence of this disease could be that it forces us to take a long, hard look at the way we run the world and change it. And there's been some pretty dramatic changes. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia essentially shut down virtually all pilgrimages to Mecca and Medina. What's the word that we always use now? This is unprecedented. And there's pictures you see, they were all over the internet, of the Kaaba there, their holy site, sitting in the shadow of this, one of the tallest buildings on the planet, the largest shopping mall in the world, one of the largest hotels in the world, and nobody in the Kaaba. This thing is being remodeled, by the way. When they started, it could accommodate 2 million people at one time to worship. When they're done, they expect it to be able to accommodate 5 million people at one time. So this is not an inconsequential thing. Here's a picture from the big tower, taken at a time when it should be at night. They've completely shut it down for the most part. They're sanitizing it. I've seen some pretty I've mentioned a media program that was sort of blaming people who's Zionists who support Israel as being the cause. In the Arab newspaper published in London, I saw this editorial cartoon. Now, I sent it around to some people and asked them, what do you think of this? What's on the guy's helmet? Star of David. Who's wearing the mask? The coronavirus. Now, my interpretation is the coronavirus is even scared of a Jewish Israeli soldier. And this stuff is all over the place. That's a fairly mainstream publication. In Israel, a few days ago it was 60,000. Now I'm told 100,000 people in quarantine. Israel has expanded travel limits to France, Germany, Austria, and a couple other European countries. They've laid off workers at El Al. They are not flying to San Francisco. They're combining flights. There are airlines flying essentially almost empty planes to places because if they don't have the traffic, they will eventually lose that slot at that airport. And I remember after 9/11, I was flying quite a bit in those days, and I can remember flying from Columbus to the East Coast or Columbus to Dallas on a 737 with 2 or 3 other people. One time, one other guy and I flew from Ontario to Sacramento on a 730. That's freaky. It's like, a ghost plane in the horror. You can hear every creak in the plane, because there's nobody sitting there. 100,000 people in quarantine in Israel. People returning from the United States are quarantined. There's talk that they may essentially shut down visits from people in the United States because we have an outbreak of coronavirus. I don't think we've had anybody diagnosed here in Ohio yet, and it may turn out to be not that much. But there are people that are passing away from it, and there's a lot of dispute about what the death rate is and that type of thing. Somebody said, well, it's only 10% for elderly people if they get it. I'm like, I don't know. If I had a 10% chance of not making it, getting in my car to drive to church on Sunday morning, I probably wouldn't take that risk. To the voice in the back, you are elderly. I believe it's 70 and above. I only say that because I'm 66. But here's pictures of Ben Gurion Airport. Normally, and if you've ever been there, you know that at times it can take you 3 hours to get through security to get on the plane to fly home. And again, the Wall Street Journal has a very good thing talking about, what can we learn from the Spanish flu that broke out back in 1918 to 1920 and killed, estimated maybe somewhere around 100 million people worldwide, when the Earth's population was quite a bit less. And what are we going to learn? Some of the things that come out of this, though, are kind of concerning because, this thing started in China, it appears, and now this is in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, Made in China Censorship for Sale, talking about how these companies are running to China to figure out how social media can censor opinions that they don't like or agree with on their platforms. And they're adopting the Chinese model wholeheartedly. These are American companies and European companies that are doing this. So the question is, what happens? Does somebody eventually will come up, the man with the plan, as they say. Somebody will have the answers. And the coronavirus may go away and turn out to be nothing, may turn out to be overhyped. But what happens when one of these things really does come? Are people going to listen to the 400 prophets to tell them everything's going to be okay? Or are they going to listen to somebody who's telling them the truth? Or is it going to be like it is this time when people are holding opinions on all sides of the issues at the same time in a state of cognitive dissonance that I don't think I've ever really seen with anything else? So the bottom line is, I don't know. I do know that I think we're getting a picture of what can happen, and we do not know what the disruption will be in terms of what the economic impact will be. I've seen pictures of If you've ever been to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach in California and gone along that high bridge that separates the two of them, I remember when we were there a few years ago, there are tens of thousands of these containers. And I'm seeing pictures of those ports right now where a lot of the part of those ports is pretty empty. Well, when you live in a world where it's just in time, and I love, ordering from Amazon and picking it up the next day or having it delivered the next day. Exactly what I want. But what happens when, I'm pretty sure most of those things say made in China if I ever really took time to look at the box, or made in Pakistan or someplace else. And when shipping isn't moving, goods aren't moving, and when goods aren't moving, you can't fill sales. So it's a big problem. So let's talk about, well, if you want to talk about cognitive dissonance and things that don't really make sense, the third round of Israeli elections took place on Monday. And the result was, don't know yet. I mean, I know what the results were. What will happen? No clue. I don't think anybody really has a clue. So when it first came out early in the week, everybody was like, oh, Netanyahu's going to end up with 60 seats, and certainly he can convince one person from the opposition parties to join, and they'll have 61. And Netanyahu did maybe, of all his elections, he may have done better than he's ever done. Arab press, they're reporting it. This is an Arabic language newspaper from Lebanon. By the way, Lebanon, I don't think I have a slide for this. Lebanon, for the first time in its history, defaulted on some of its bonds this week, just the other day. They're in economic turmoil, having trouble putting a government together. The banks over the last 3 or 4 months have only been open maybe half the time. There are severe restrictions on withdrawing cash. There are severe restrictions on transferring money out of the country. Lebanon's in a big mess, and this newspaper, Al Akbar, essentially says this, well, Israel voted against the Palestinians. And there's page after page after page in there about how this was an anti-Palestinian, anti-two-state solution vote by the Israeli public. So now, what's going to happen? Who's going to get the mandate to form? And again, early on, it looked like maybe Netanyahu was going to have 60 people in his coalition, 60 members of Knesset. Avigdor Lieberman of Israel Beteinu party, it's a largely Russian party. He got 7 seats again, and he doesn't like Netanyahu. So there's all sorts of threats. Here's one of the graphs that comes out. So you see what ended up was Likud got 36, Blue and White got 33, which is kind of amazing because nobody knows what Blue and White stands for. They're just sort of, well, they do stand for something. Not Netanyahu. That's their sort of their operative thing. They don't really have a core. Some of the people in Blue and White agree with a lot of the Likud positions on security and national defense, but then there's the left-wing members. So when you look at the thing on here's a little bit of graphic in English. You can see how these panned out. The Joint Arab List did better than they've ever done. They were unified. So they got 15 seats. So here's the way the blocks do. If you put all the right parties together, you have 58 seats. You need 61. Doesn't work. So what Netanyahu is trying to do is he's trying to say, okay, I want 3 people, and they've identified them. They've had their pictures in the paper and articles about these are the 4 people they're going to target to flip. And the people say, we're not changing. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll be offered a portfolio that they can run as a minister in the cabinet, and they may come over. That's how they got Avigdor Lieberman, the Yisrael Beteinu party. But look at what the difference is. So you have 58 here on the right. You have blue and white, who says, well, we'll never join with the Arabs. They were saying that. They have 15, so that's 55, 58 to 55. And so Lieberman's 7 can flip one way or the other. If he goes with the left in the joint Arab list, that's 62. If he goes with the right, it's 65. And he's saying, as long as you got the Orthodox religious parties in there, I'm not joining that party. This morning, this is the news headlines from Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post. And essentially, Gantz, it says here in the Jerusalem Post, Gantz starts forming government. But wait a minute, I thought you said he didn't have enough. I thought you said he only had 40 and 15 who he doesn't want to join with, but he would join with Lieberman maybe and the Joint Arab List to form sort of a minority government and take control of things. And Gantz says this is a ridiculous statement. I'll form a coalition. Voters want the prime minister out. He did better than he's ever done. Talking about cognitive dissonance, that's it. Now the proposal is, and the report today is that Gantz is forming a government, very secret talks going on, and I'm sure Netanyahu's doing the same thing. But the word is that Lieberman will join with blue and white in the Arab list to form a government. Temporarily, they will form a Knesset, they will meet, and the first thing that they will do is they will pass a law that says that no one that is under indictment can form a government. And Netanyahu has a trial starting in 2 weeks. So then what they would do is they would form that government, vote on that law, and then their coalition would fall apart and they would call for more elections. Now, and this has very much parallels to what's going on in the United States. Because what it does is it gives prosecutors and judges an outside influence. And Caroline Glick has a very good article sort of tracing the parallels that you can read at Israel Hayom. I won't go into it, but she says the same thing happened in the United States is now happening in Israel. And the people who support this are, they're not thinking it through. Because they may be in the minority someday. Or the people that control the judiciary may start indicting them. And what it does is it puts so much power in the hands of prosecutors and judges. It's not the way a Democrat, it's as undemocratic a thing as you can do. And if Gantz and Lieberman go through this, I hope they are destroyed politically. They should be destroyed politically. Because there's no balance left in the system. And it's exactly what the Democrats want to do here. What Chuck Schumer said is what a lot of the Democrats are doing, wanting, and again, everybody criticizes the judiciary. They make stupid decisions. The president does this and everything, but when you start threatening them physically, that's a different order of magnitude. So the question is, so everything in Israel is in complete turmoil. And here's Caroline's article, in America, voting is the only game in town and voters are the source of power. In Israel, the courts are in charge. And I would disagree with her that I think in America they really want to follow the Israel model that seems to be working right now. So will there be a fourth election? I don't know. Well, I think it's very likely. I'm very concerned about this little stunt that they may pull to put in this law about Netanyahu being under indictment. So he can't form a government. But what if he's found not guilty in over the next month? Well, they'll come up with other indictments. And now I hear they're considering indictments against Lieberman. They're considering things against Gantz. And it's just a huge mess. And I don't know, how long does this cycle go on, especially in a world that's in this state of turmoil? Somebody suggested that this might be a campaign poster in 2053 as things move forward. Round 72 between Gantz and Netanyahu. Who knows? So that's, I think this turmoil thing, let me suggest this. Jared Kushner met with the UN Security Council a couple weeks ago and did a PowerPoint presentation for them on the plan that he developed for the Trump administration, the Peace to Prosperity Plan. Reports in Axios, the Jerusalem Post over the last couple days says that Kushner has essentially, he met with the U.S. senators this week and he gave them the same PowerPoint presentation. Kushner is reported to have said, listen, if the Palestinians don't come to the table, we're going to give the green light to Israel annexing land right away. And then all things are off. All bets are off. But I just want you to put this in the context of like the Daniel 9 passage that we talk about, the confirmation of a covenant. And my view is the word there, it's like forced an agreement on them. It's not necessarily something that everybody, loves. And I think that the chances that something like that would be forced on Israel go up when Israel is in a state of political turmoil. And I'm not saying that what Trump came out with is the plan, but look, here's some of the slides from Kushner's presentation. I'd like to tell you that I have secret sources at in the Capitol, but I found it on the internet. You can find almost everything on the internet now. It's amazing. It's like there are no secrets. The secrets are out there. So here it says, peace, prosperity, a plan to improve the lives of the Palestinian people. So he gave this to the UN Security Council. He gave this to the Senate. So he says here, these are real slides from his presentation. Definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting a different results. And he goes through and he traces all of the different plans and peace talks that have taken place over the years. And the only thing that happened is Israel continues to annex more land and the Palestinians continue to get more money and nothing ever gets solved. So he says this, how this conflict is used by jihadists to radicalize youth. And he shows some of the images from Twitter that in different social media platforms that are used to get people riled up. He does a summary of the deal. So there's been a lot of controversy, is he dividing the land and all this other stuff. So look, here's Jared Kushner's own words, okay? What is the first point that he makes in the summary of the deal? Two-state solution. Now, I haven't taken math for a long time. And I went to IU Law School, so we were told at IU Law School, if you ever have a math problem, hire somebody from Purdue. Okay, if you have anything, because Purdue, they're into farming, anything involving math and animal husbandry and engineering, you go to Purdue. So if you have a manure problem, you hire an expert from Purdue, because they understand that stuff. Because they have degrees in it, I think. So, but I do know that if you have one state and you turn it into two states, that requires division. Pretty simple division. Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, define land swaps. Al-Aqsa Mosque secure and open to all. But then there's other things, though, that are kind of inconsistent with that, because he goes on to the other, one of his other slides. He talks about, here it is, Israel and the Islamic world, the source of the conflicts, is dispute over the security administration and access to the Haram al-Sharif al-Aqsa Mosque, the Temple Mount. And how are they going to do that? So, these are Jared Kushner's own words. You can find the thing online and look at them. But they're trying to come up with a two-state solution. I don't think there's any, it's how he pitched it everywhere he went. Now, the Palestinians don't like it, probably won't agree with it. In Israel, they don't really like it, and they may just go ahead and start annexing land anyway. I'm just saying, in the state of political turmoil, the chances that somebody would force something on the parties, I think, is increased than if you have a strong government. I have no idea how this is going to play out. He notes 700 United General Assembly resolutions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. over 100 Security Council resolutions. So he talks about, we want to bring it into this. I will also say this on the UN. I didn't have time to put it into a slide. UN human rights people came out yesterday or the other day with a document. I'll put it in my presentation for next week. Essentially saying, if you have you cannot use religion as a basis for denying LGBT rights to people or making decisions about that. In other words, it goes along with this thing that I've talked about a number of times. You see it happening in France, you see it happening in Europe in particular. You're allowed to believe anything you want as long as you never talk to anybody about it. It's private belief is what's protected. In the United States, our Constitution says the free exercise of religion is protected, but there are people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, who in Columbus last year at the whatever that group is, they have the blue thing with the yellow equal sign. Human Rights Campaign, I think it is. And he said, first thing I do is put in the Equality Act. And he released a bunch of stuff this week that is consistent with what the UN said about how you religious people should conduct yourselves and how you cannot use your religious beliefs. There's a great interview on BBC that I saw this week. You can probably find it on Twitter. I'll try to play it next week. And it's essentially, look, this is, it's a young lady. It's the lady I mentioned like a week or two ago who's suing the doctors and the NHS for having done a mastectomy on her and giving her puberty blockers and all this stuff. And she's angry. And so I'll give BBC credit, I think it was the BBC that did it, for interviewing her and letting her speak her piece about this. But listen, if the Equality Act in the U.S. and what they want to do and the UN, what they've just come out with, and so this is how all the religions of the world should act. We know better than everybody. The word coming out of that will be to this young lady is shut up and live with the fact that we mutilated you. I had a clip. It was on the coronavirus. You want me to play it? It's a medical doctor. Okay, give me 1 second here. I'll have to insert it into a slide. I apologize. I'm telling you, I got about 3 hours sleep each of the last 2 nights trying to put this stuff together. It's been an incredible couple weeks with all the different things going on. This was on, I think, British Channel 5. You'll see the name of the doctor here in just a moment. And I'm only passing along as, you can say you don't agree with him, that, he's just making it up and all this other stuff. But this is what this doctor had to say.
This is the most frightening disease I've ever encountered in my career, and that includes Ebola, it includes MERS, it includes SARS. And it's frightening because of the combination of infectiousness and a lethality that appears to be many-fold higher than flu.
What scientists know about this virus so far? What concerns you most about it?
I think the most concerning thing about this virus is the combination of infectiousness and the ability to cause severe disease or death. And we have not since 1918,
the Spanish
flu, seen a virus that combined those two qualities in the same way. We have seen very lethal viruses. We have seen certainly Ebola or Nipah or any of the other diseases that CEPI, the organization that I run, works on. But those viruses have high mortality rates. I mean, Ebola's mortality rate in some settings is greater than 80%, but they don't have the infectiousness that this virus has. They don't have the potential to explode and spread globally.
So you fear this could end up being on a scale of the Spanish flu?
I don't want to make a prediction because I think what happens with this virus is actually up to us. I do think this virus has the potential to cause a global pandemic if we're not already there. And I do think the virus has demonstrated that it has a lethality that is likely many-fold higher than normal flu.
What do you say to people who say, you're using these martial metaphors, you're making it sound very scary. You have a vested interest in making people fearful, so you get the investment in a vaccine. What do you say to that?
I've been working on epidemic preparedness for about 20 years, and completely dispassionately, without elevating the temperature or speaking hyperbolically. This is the most frightening disease I've ever encountered in my career, and that includes Ebola, it includes MERS, it includes SARS.
Well, so that I just wanted to back up on that because I forgot to play that. So listen, like I said, you can give me. It's very interesting. Early in my career, I did a lot of medical malpractice work, defending doctors, sometimes going after doctors for medical malpractice. And we would always hire experts. And so one side would bring their expert in, and the other side would bring their expert in, and the jury would decide who wins, or you would settle the case. And some people made a living doing this. I remember a guy in Philadelphia, I deposed him many times. And the last time I deposed him, he said, just sit there, take your notes. I'll go through all the questions that you go through every time that we have these depositions. And he just talked for an hour. And I said, I think you covered it all, thanks. And got up and went and had a cheesesteak and came home. And so you can always find people on either side of these issues. So it's very difficult to figure out exactly what the truth is. And frankly, I don't know, if you took all the voices that are out there talking right now to a jury, you'd probably end up with a hung jury that couldn't come to a decision. So we have coronavirus, economic downturn. We have turmoil in Israel, elections, peace plan, that type of thing. And then we also have this situation with Turkey, Russia, and Syria, and with Iran layered on top of it. And Iran has its own coronavirus outlet. And this is a speech that Erdogan gave this week in Turkey, and he framed Turkish military cross-border offensive as a religious war. He even recited a poem that describes the Turkish army as the last army of Islam that dies for Allah. He promised that God supports Turkey and everybody will see how capable the army is. So this is the rhetoric that he's using. What he's doing, it is a religious holy war that he's engaged in. Somebody pulled this out. Somebody tweeted this week. It's a video of Erdogan many years ago. And it says, essentially, I had the quote here someplace. Erdogan is God's messenger, Allah's messenger. This is how a lot of people view him. So you have to keep that in mind. So we have this situation in northwest Syria in Idlib, and there is a series of a lot of problems that are going on. In the context of this, there's a very good article in the Wall Street Journal by Jonathan Spire the other day, Israel's new diplomatic moment, because of all this turmoil that's going on and some things going on in the Arab world and the Arab world's stalemate or governments being very unstable at the moment. And essentially what he says is, this is a great moment for Israel diplomatically. With the subtext like, yeah, if we had a real government, it would be a great moment. But we don't have it. So are we going to be able to take advantage of that? So there's a situation in northern Syria, northwest Syria, Turkey, Idlib province. I have a couple maps here. Let me give maybe a little better map. So what happened this week, well, early in the week, Jonathan Spire had another great article in the Jerusalem Post, and he talked about Idlib, the next phase. This was before Erdogan and Putin got together. And Spire looked at everything. He's a very good analyst. I highly recommend his work, that you read it to follow what's going on. And he said, Erdogan and Putin are going to probably work it out some way, because they're both at the risk of losing a lot if this thing unwinds the wrong way in Idlib. I saw this editorial cartoon in one of the papers that I look at, an Arab language newspaper, and you see the imagery that's used. I mean, I love editorial cartoons because of the imagery that they use. And you see Erdogan or Putin holding a olive branch in one hand, and the other one is shelling villages. And this is a picture. This is Balyoun village in northwest Syria in the Idlib area. And this is drone footage taken the other day. The damage in that village. Now, what do you think happened to all the people that lived there? Do you think they're sticking around? Do you think they've gone anywhere? I mean, you see these pictures of cities and towns and villages all over Syria that look like this. There's nobody around. People don't want to live in a war zone. Another thing that's happened too in this Syria-Turkish conflict, played a lot of pictures of this, is Turkey has really developed over the last 15 years pretty good technology and use of drones. Now their drones are getting shot down, but they're not losing people, and you can see that there's all kinds of statistics out there, and they've taken out 100 tanks. Some reports are 3,000 Syrian soldiers. They've also lost over 100 soldiers. I think I played this one last week. The guy here that you see this blast, and then when it clears, you see this, who got to be one of the luckiest guys in the world, running away from that when everybody else was killed. So Putin and Erdogan got together this week. Now, on the left is the meeting between Putin and Erdogan when they first met in Moscow. And if you look at that video, there's a very good body language behavioral analysis of what was going on there. But if you watch Putin, very little eye contact, and the way he's using his hands, and that type of thing. And look, there are experts that can tell you almost exactly what he's thinking. And you can tell if you watch that video that Putin is not very happy. Now, this is causing a lot of problems for Putin, because he may have to get his military actively involved if Erdogan keeps doing what he's doing. And Putin has some assets there in Syria that he wants to protect. But if you really watch that closely, even if you're not listening to it, Putin's voice was very tight. Very little time was he spent looking at them. Now, they had a meeting for about 6 hours, and they came out after that meeting was over, and they announced that there would be a ceasefire. This is a very hot area of the world. If you just look at the map, let me get my little laser pointer up here. So Russia has its assets up here in the Black Sea. If they want to put naval assets into the Syrian theater, they all have to go down here through the Bosporus at Istanbul. That's controlled by Erdogan in Turkey. Now, usually Turkey will escort them. With naval ships, but now they're escorting them with police boats. They haven't shut it down yet. And so what Erdogan or Putin wants to do is he has to come all the way around here, around Turkey, all the way over here to Tartus is right here south of Latakia. Latakia is where they have an air base. Tartus is where they have a seaport in Idlib province. Here I actually have a zoomed in version. So here is the area of Syria, northwest Syria and southern Turkey. You see Idlib. Here's Aleppo. Here's Idlib. And here is Latakia. There is a road that goes all the way up here through Idlib to Aleppo, to northwest Syria. There's Raqqa. That's where the Islamic State had its capital over here. So that's the Euphrates River and reservoirs along the Euphrates. So it's very important that they be able to get the supplies from Latakia and Tartus down here, up this road over to Aleppo, because they want to maintain that area. Aleppo, I think, is or was the most populous city in Syria, about 4 million people. About 20% of the country lived there at one point. So this road is very important. So when they got together, so here's I forgot I had all this. Idlib, Aleppo, Raqqa, Tartus, Latakia. So here's a map in Russian language about the security zone that they have. Here's a little bit better map. And so what they did was along this highway from Latakia to Aleppo, they've made a security corridor now, which is sort of like a no fighting zone. And they signed it up and everybody went back and they're already fighting. They're shelling each other and that type of thing. So it's not been solved. But in this blue area, the dark green area is what the Syrian government has taken back over since January, over the last 2 months. In that blue area, it's about, 10 miles wide, 20 miles north to south. There are 3 million people that live there. And this is the problem. This is where all these refugees are coming from, the fighting. So this is an editorial cartoon. You see the lady carrying the Middle East on her shoulders, the refugee and that type of thing. Here was an interview on Al Jazeera about, boy, I didn't do very good. Hang on a second here. I got to put my slide in. Apologize for this. Okay, here's a little interview with one of the UN people about what's going on in Syria, in Idlib.
But the harsh, brutal reality is that there is no escape for a lot of these people, is there? Turkey, which has taken in millions of people in the past, has shut the border. So if you're a Syrian stranded in Idlib right now, there's basically a death sentence hanging over you.
Yes, what we're dealing with is a situation of 3 million people who are trapped in a war zone. These are people who are not simply fleeing fighting between two opposing armies. This is a population which itself is under attack. They come from towns and villages which have faced systematic, wide-scale, indiscriminate bombing, airstrikes and shelling that has continued day and night. Entire cities and towns have been emptied out. And as these people have fled, many of them have been hit along the way when shells and airstrikes have landed on the routes that they've been using to try to escape. So this is a protection crisis on a monumental scale, and something has to be done.
So are you calling on Turkey to open the border, or is it impossible for Turkey to cope with another 3 million refugees, given I believe they've already taken in 4 million Syrians over the last few years?
Turkey already hosts more refugees than any other country in the world, and it hosts many more Syrian refugees than any other country, 3.6 million Syrian refugees. So most UN member states are not being heard calling on Turkey to open its borders. I think they know that if Turkey has to open its borders, the next question will be, are European countries going to be opening their borders?
And are you saying that European countries should be taking in more Syrian refugees? Because again, European governments say that's a problem for us.
Well, the whole world needs to shoulder its responsibilities towards these people. If they cannot be protected inside their own country, then they'll have to be protected somewhere else.
And so
But the harsh,
there it is.
brutal.
I did actually have the slide, and I apologize. So one last thing here. So there is this big conflict now. Oil prices are dropping. I think I bought gas for $1.80 the other day here in Columbus. So the Saudis are saying we got to cut back production to raise the price. But when you do that, you're not selling as much oil, so even though you're getting it, you're losing revenue. And Russia is saying natural gas and everything, we're going to sell and pump as much as we can. So there's this conflict that's developed between Russia and Saudi Arabia. And even internally within Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of conflict internally about how do we deal with this problem. Because they need oil to be at about $65, $70 a barrel, and now it's around 50. Natural gas prices are dropping. This is a huge economic problem. It's creating more problems in the Middle East, even within a government like Saudi Arabia, which is viewed as somewhat stable. And so now there are these reports that Mohammed bin Salman has arrested a couple of other princes. A bunch of people have been detained. There are reports, I've not been able to verify them, that King Salman, he essentially in 2017, he turned over everything to his son as the crown prince, but he's in a coma or has died. These are the rumors that are floating around. So he's had to retain, he's put all these people in, and what you see down here, like in the lower right-hand corner, you see these people in the national security apparatus in Saudi Arabia. They're putting up tweets and stuff about, long live Mohammed bin Salman and King Salman, because I support you. So now I'm just going to show you a little bit about how this all come about. So Saudi Arabia, the original king in 1932 was King Abdulaziz, King Saud, and he ruled till about 1953, and he had, nobody knows exactly the number, around 41 to 43 sons. So they would pass everything down through the sons. So he died, and he had a bunch of sons. So until this day, so he died almost 60 years ago, his sons have been succeeding one another. Well, when you have 41 sons, and they have multiple wives and a lot of kids, pretty soon you have a pretty big clan. And then he had a wife that was the favorite wife. So 7 sons from the favorite wife have been the ones through who the king line has gone. But now they're all dying off. So Mohammed bin Salman would be the first one to rule Saudi Arabia who was not the original king or one of the sons of the king. So remember this guy, he died in 2015, King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz. And he had an interesting title in that he was the first one to have not only the title of king, but the protector of the 2 holy mosques. So in 2012, he appointed one of his brothers to be the crown prince, 2011. And the guy died. So then he appointed his brother, King Salman, to be the crown prince. King Salman became the crown prince when his brother died in 2012. King Salman, in turn, this is very interesting. It would make an interesting TV movie or series, really, about the intrigue that goes on in the Saud Palace. And they're incredibly wealthy. Mohammed bin Salman has a yacht that's worth about $500 million. I don't know if you know that. So it's not like these people are paupers. So there's a lot of money. With money comes a lot of power. So King Abdullah made this guy, Prince Mohammed bin Naif, the crown prince when he came to the throne in 2015. But then something happened, and in 2017, he made one of his youngest sons, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. So now what's happened is that the former crown prince and another brother of King Salman have been arrested and detained, And there's something that there's been a palace coup. So these two guys in red have been arrested. And so now we have yet another government in turmoil in the Middle East. And what does that mean? The belief is that Mohammed bin Salman is not liked because he seems to be open. He's changing things in the kingdom, letting women drive, and he seems to be favorable towards Israel. I've heard reports that he had a Jewish nanny when he was growing up. I've heard that. I don't know if it's true. I'm just passing it along. I've seen that more than one place. So he seems to be a little bit sympathetic to Israel. All I'm saying is, do you understand what I'm trying to say is there's this convergence of all of these things happening all at once. And you need to pay attention to what's going on, because I don't know how it's all going to play out. I know eventually Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom and cleans up this whole mess. And so we can look forward to that, but you need to understand that it will be, I think, sort of a turbulent, tumultuous time to be alive until then. So let's pray, and we'll take up some more details on these things this week. Father, thanks so much for your word. We pray, Lord, that you would help us in these times to be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves, that you will give us wisdom as to how we can protect ourselves, do the right thing, and minister to those around us who might be in great need. Pray that you will put your supernatural protection on us and keep us healthy during these times. And again, give us wisdom to act and give us opportunities to share the gospel with those around us, because people are going into eternity in many different ways these days. And the time is now for salvation. Give us opportunities to share that gospel. In Jesus' name, amen.
Here we go. Copyright, I get it. It's better than driving to Sunbury, just listen to your BVDs, slouching around and feeling groovy. Da-da-da-da-da-da, feeling groovy. They have to give us the John. Yeah, some music over there. Read that. Hello, Howler. What's a shaking? Don't want to watch the world a-quaking. Ain't you got any good news for me? Do watching TV. Ba-da-da-da-da-da, feeling groovy. We're going to do another Howler verse here. Hello, Howler, lay it on us. What's new on the coronavirus? Ain't you got good news for me? Do watching TV. Ba-da-da-da-da-da, feeling groovy. Little bridge here. We got graphics galore and fake news is cheap. Sometimes it's so wacky it lulls me to sleep. Let Convergence just steamroll and buffalo me. John, we love you. You're so groovy. You need to make John, this the bumper. We love you. You're so groovy. That's all. Very good.